Episode 2. Exodus. The numbers are adding up, but not in the way you thought. In this episode, you will come across information that you have never been told previously. If you take the Bible as fact, this will make you think. For the purpose of this episode, we have to look at numbers, but more specifically, the number of people that left Egypt under the leadership of Moses. We have to do this in order to understand the true scope of this epic saga. The pictures and paintings that you see where Moses stand at the Red Sea, with a couple of hundred people does not tell the true story. The image that most people have about Exodus is the one planted in their heads by the church, and that image is light years away from what actually took place. Let's have a look at the numerical facts as we find them in the Bible. There are 3 verses in the Bible where we find an indication on the number of slaves that left Egypt with Moses. The first reference to that multitude is in Exodus 12, verse 37, and I quote, "The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children." It is important to note that in this verse, the women and children are excluded in the 600,000. The 600,000 is adult men only. Women and children were not included, and men were only counted from age 20 and older. It is very important to remember these 2 facts. The second reference to the male population is in Exodus 38 verse 26, and I quote, "A beker for every man, that is, half a shekel, after the shekel of the sanctuary, for every one that went to be numbered, from 20 years old and upward, for 600,550 men." This verse is also very specific when it says 600,000 men, but only from ages 20 and up. Men younger than 20 were not considered as an adult in biblical times, and were therefore not counted as such. Finally, we have a reference in Numbers 26 verse 51, and I quote, "The total number of men of Israel was 601,730. From these 3 verses, we can conclude that the number of adult males who left Egypt as slaves were at least 600,000, age 20 and older. Many scholars, academics and Christian clergy doubt the number 600,000 when it comes to the Jewish adult males who left Egypt with Moses. They base their logic on the fact that only about 70 Jews entered Egypt as the core of the Jewish nation. According to them, the original 70 Jews could not have multiplied in the given period to reach a number of 600,000 adult males at the time of the biblical Exodus. They are absolutely right, it could not happen, but there is a logical explanation. Not everybody who left Egypt with Moses was Jewish. Most of the slaves in Egypt, when given the chance, left with Moses. Jew and non-Jewish slaves banded together as one oppressed group, and that's why you get the number 600,000. It was a matter of in for a penny, in for a pound. When the chains of oppression broke, every slave who could would have used the opportunity to escape slavery. It's only logical. Now that we know the male population of all the slaves that left Egypt, we can estimate the total population in the biblical Exodus. It is a proven statistic that in any population, the females always outnumber the males, but for this exercise, we will go 1 for 1, thus we will only match every male with a female. 600,000 males plus 600,000 females will give you an adult slave population of 1.2 million people. Historically, statistics tells us that the age group between 1 and 20 is always the largest fraction of a population. It would have been the same in ancient times. So we have to add this group as well. There must have been young men and women under the age of 20, including teenagers, teens and babies, in this epic flight from Egypt and slavery. If we add only 1 child under the age of 20 per adult, then we have another 1.2 million souls. When we add it all together, we have an estimated slave population that left Egypt of 2.4 million humans, at the minimum. No church or preacher will ever tell you this. It is completely ignored and bypassed simply because they fear the questions that will arise from these numbers. They don't want the people, their flock, to think about the logistical nightmare when it comes to controlling, guiding and supervising such a vast concentration of humanity for at least 40+ years, in a desert. We have 2.4 million people entering a desert, and the church doesn't want you to ever think about that number. They don't want you to do basic maths. They don't want you to visualize that multitude and start to ask simple logistical questions. Logical questions surrounding food, communication, water, deaths and sanitation. Let's just discuss the sanitation quickly. Where do you go with all the human waste of 2.4 million people on a daily basis in the desert? It makes you think, doesn't it? The situation was so bad, that massive horde of humanity had to be taught what to do. We find the solution to the problem in Deuteronomy 23 verses 12 and 13, and I quote, "You shall have a place outside the camp, and you shall go out to it. You shall have a trowel with your tools, and when you sit down outside, you shall dig a hole with it and turn back and cover up your excrement." This is just one example of a rule that had to be implemented in order to keep this barbaric multitude semi-civilized. We are working with 2.4 million people here. If you place all those people in a military-type column of 10 people wide and with a space of 1 meter per line, you will have 240,000 lines of 10 people each. This will translate into a column of 10 people wide but 240 kilometers long. Just try and fathom the human waste produced on a daily basis by all these people, and that is excluding the animals. The ex-slaves from Egypt are in a desert with thousands of their animals. It's a barren region. What would all that animals eat? They can't survive on sand. The church and preachers don't want you to ever ask these uncomfortable questions. Most Christians think that Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and slavery. They are right and they are wrong. The correct term would be that Moses led all the Egyptian slaves out of Egypt and there were Jews among them. If you read Exodus 12 verse 38 in the Bible, it says, and I quote, "A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock." The words, mixed and multitude, implies two things. Firstly, the slaves were not all descendants of Abraham and thus not genetically related to the chosen people. Secondly, the word multitude tells us there were thousands of the so-called, not chosen ones. We learn three things from this. Firstly, the Jews are not a pure race. They have interbred with thousands of non-Jews in the desert. Secondly, the church doesn't want you to realize that the Exodus consisted of at least 2.4 million Jews and non-Jews. Thirdly, you must never think about the logistics surrounding this biblical saga where 2.4 million uneducated, filthy, ex-slaves wander around in a desert for 40 years, led by one man, called Moses. You must never think, question, calculate or go against the carefully designed and deliberately distorted, 1,500-year-old religious storyline. You must just believe what you are being told, question nothing and obey without doubt, nothing more, nothing less. If you have enjoyed this account regarding the number of slaves that left Egypt with Moses and the Jewish inbreeding, please like, share and subscribe. There are many more accurate biblical truths to expose on this channel. If you would like to make a donation to this channel, please use the following email address, bajoladu@gmail.com.